In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about Deceased Finder best practices. Deceased Finder is a really great tool as part of RE NXT to help identify individuals who potentially may be deceased so that you can appropriately update the records. Helps reduce, mailing or emailing to those people and any costs spent on mailing that may be returned or may upset a donor. The Deceased Finder service is something extra. Versus with Address Finder, it usually comes as part of the RE NXT subscription. Deceased Finder, however, is a separate type of service. And so if and when you do subscribe to Deceased Finder, this is what the results typically look like. So it will tell you how many total records that it's identified as potentially deceased, and then it will identify those that are new in the past 90 days. So because this in the past 90 days. And so it will constantly, be checking. And so anything new in the past 90 days will appear here. And then it gives you just some more stats on, how many in the last year, how many in the last 90 days. So I pulled up and I have created some documentation that I've used for this, and I've kind of put it into text format since this is some live data, since we don't have the Deceased Finder running on our sandbox. I don't want to open up these lists because I don't want to show any donor data. So I'm just going to go through how I would typically approach this, and once I get the Deceased Finder results back from Blackbaud. So whenever I'm looking at the data, I typically want to start with the ones that are new in the past 90 days. So I'm going to click on this column. It'll bring out a flyout of information of all of those individuals, and there is an area where you can export at the very top. So once I click export, there's a column in that file called impact risk. That is the column I want to sort by first. It's basically looking at if we got this, so the impact risk is looking at the impact of that constituent's passing on the organization from low to high. So based on when they may have passed away, the date and amount of their most recent gift, total lifetime giving, affiliations with your organization based on constituent codes, and potentially their spouse's activity with the organization. So if there's less information on someone, it's going to be a lower risk versus if there's a lot of information. Those may be medium or high risk, and we want to make sure we carefully look at those because they have just more data on those records. So I recommend starting with the ones that are low first. So then you're going to look at the system record ID in that export file up here. So unfortunately, when this information comes out into Excel, it does not have constituent ID, which I know is so convenient. Thank you, Blackbaud. It gives you the system record ID. So what you'll need to do is go create the constituent query to do your kind of review of that data. You'll have to use the system record ID instead of the constituent ID. I know, it's annoying. So once you've created your query, I have created a deceased cleanup export that I've used to basically review all of the information that I may need to look at for the individual, much of which I'll go through next. But I'll pull that into an export that I've designated as my deceased cleanup export. Then I'm basically going to, and so I will say that many times what I've done is once I run it through the export, I'm going to pull in the name from the Deceased Finder export into the Razor's Edge export because I want to compare names. So I will use a VLOOKUP to do that. I'll also use a VLOOKUP to compare the birth year and the death date. So it's just a good check. I would say in my experience, the information that comes back from Deceased Finder is pretty good, especially the ones that have confirmed by death certificate, because usually it's looking at the name and the date. I have had some organizations that I've worked with that really wanted me to pay attention to the suffixes just to make sure, and in pretty much every single case it was correct. But it's still good to do your due diligence and pull in the suffix into this deceased cleanup export so that you can compare. So again, if we have birth years in our database, it's just a good check to make sure we have the right person. And then we want to bring the death date in into our export from Razor's Edge, and we want to compare that death date with recent giving. So that's where you may find potentially something that's off if deceased finder is saying this person died 10 years ago and you have a recent gift from them. So anyone with recent giving, we really want to make sure and confirm prior to deceasing. I also like to pull in current solicitor information, or relationship manager, whatever the term is at your organization, into that export as well, just so that that solicitor can confirm. They usually, if it's someone they've been working with, will have close personal knowledge and can tell you if the information is correct or not. So as mentioned, typically if it's confirmed by death certificate, those can kind of globally be marked deceased as long as there's no recent giving and our suffixes match. The ones that are confirmed by a relative, these are the ones that I have typically sent to those that I work with, people in the organization who know the donors. I send it to them to review. I don't want to be the one to mark them deceased without having them review it first. So then my next step was that I created an import file where I could easily, I had my IDs, and then I brought in the date from the deceased finder, and then I pulled it into my import, and then I just had the settings in the import file to update to, I had the settings in the import file set to just update the records, and so it updated and marked them deceased, added the deceased date, and it added the birth date if they didn't already have one. In many cases, if there already is a birth date, I usually would not write it over unless it was just really, really wrong and I felt like the information from deceased finder was correct. Then basically everybody who was left as a medium risk, I would send it to my internal team with all of their information about each prospect for them to review manually. So this is a good approach to kind of trusting but verifying what Blackbaud is saying, where we'll go and review the information that is identified as more critical than the newer ones. And then again, we can go through the same process with the rest of the list, but I typically recommend starting here just to make sure that you're addressing the more recent ones first.